At the diner, as officers humiliated a black veteran, Clint Eastwood watched every detail with a gaze filled with steely indignation, determined to turn that shameful act into a powerful symbol of resistance and justice that would resonate far beyond that moment. The sound of breaking glass shattered the midnight calm. Eliza froze, breath caught in her throat as shards scattered across the hardwood floor of her living room. The brick responsible lay among the glittering fragments, wrapped in a piece of paper secured by a rubber band. Outside, a car engine roared to life and tires screeched against asphalt. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. 3 missed calls from Detective Jake Sullivan. She should have answered. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you are watching us from. We continue. Mom. Her 13-year-old daughter appeared in the hallway, eyes wide with fear. What was that? Go back to your room, Lily. Lock the door. Eliza's voice was surprisingly steady, despite the hurricane raging inside her chest. Carefully avoiding the glass, she picked up the brick and unwrapped the note. The handwriting was jagged, pressed so deeply into the paper that it had torn in places. You know what happens to witnesses who talk. The trial was in 3 days. 3 days until she would have to sit in that courtroom and point to Walt Jefferson, respected business owner, philanthropist, and secret architect of a human trafficking operation that had claimed at least 17 lives. She had seen him that night, emerging from the back door of his restaurant, helping load unconscious girls into a van. Their eyes had met across the alley for just a moment before she fled. But a moment was all it took. He knew her face, and now he knew where she lived. Eliza dialed Detective Sullivan, her finger leaving a smudge of blood on the screen. She hadn't even noticed the glass cutting her. "They found me," she whispered when he answered. "They found Lily." She looked toward her daughter's room, the weight of her decision pressing down on her like a physical presence. Testify and risk both their lives, or stay silent and let those girls disappear forever. Behind her, the portrait of Michael, her late husband, Lily's father, seemed to watch her, his eyes asking the same question that had haunted her since that night in the alley. What kind of world do you want your daughter to inherit? 6. Months earlier, Eliza Morgan hadn't been anyone special, just a 42-year-old single mother working as a night shift nurse at Mercy Hospital. Her copper-red hair was usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the only remarkable thing about her appearance was a distinctive crescent-shaped scar above her left eyebrow, a souvenir from the car accident that had claimed her husband's life 5 years ago. Dedicated to a fault, she took extra shifts to save for Lily's college fund, sleeping during the day while her daughter was at school. Her life was a carefully constructed routine of work, sleep, and being there for Lily, until that April night when she took a shortcut home through the alley behind Jefferson's Steakhouse. Eliza had always been observant, a necessary trait in nursing, but that night she wished she hadn't been. The restaurant had closed hours ago, yet there was activity at the back door. In the dim light, she saw Walter Jefferson himself, sleeves rolled up, helping 2 men load what appeared to be drunk patrons into an unmarked van. But something wasn't right. These weren't intoxicated diners. They were young women, completely unconscious, being handled like cargo. One girl's head lolled back, and in the harsh glow of the security light, Eliza caught a glimpse of her face. Couldn't have been more than 16. A dish clattered inside the kitchen, and Jefferson turned. His eyes met Eliza's across the alley, and in that instant, her world shifted on its axis. The mask of respectability dropped, revealing something cold and predatory beneath. She ran. For 3 days, she told herself to forget what she'd seen. Jefferson was practically royalty in Riverbrook, a mid-sized New England town that had seen better days before Jefferson Investments started revitalizing the downtown area. His name was on half the buildings, his face in the local paper, shaking hands with the mayor. But the girl's face haunted her. So on the 4th day, Eliza walked into the police station and asked for Detective Jake Sullivan. Sullivan was a man worn down by decades of seeing the worst of humanity. His salt and pepper hair, more salt than pepper now. Deep lines etched around eyes that had lost the ability to be shocked. His most defining trait was his hands. Large, calloused, always in motion, as if constantly working through a problem only he could see. "Mrs. Morgan," he said after hearing her story, his voice carrying the weight of 17 years on the force, "do you understand what you're suggesting? Walter Jefferson is one of the most powerful men in this town." "I know what I saw." Her voice didn't waver. Sullivan's restless hands went still, and he studied her with new interest. "We've had rumors about Jefferson for years. Nothing solid, no witnesses willing to go on record." The unspoken question hung in the air. "I'll testify," Eliza said, not yet understanding the gravity of those two words. That decision set in motion a series of events that would dismantle her carefully constructed life. The initial investigation was kept quiet, but in a town Jefferson's size, nothing stayed secret for long. First came the calls, breathing, silence, then a hang-up. Then Lily reported being followed home from school. Eliza's car was vandalized, the word liar scratched into the driver's door. Detective Sullivan assigned an officer to drive Lily to and from school, but they both knew it was a temporary solution. The preliminary hearing had given them enough to bring charges against Jefferson, but the trial was the real battleground. "You can still back out," Sullivan told her the night before she was due to meet with the prosecutor. They sat in her kitchen, the house dark except for the light above the stove. "No one would blame you." Eliza turned her wedding ring, she still wore it, around her finger. "Michael was a public defender. Did you know that?" She didn't wait for Sullivan to answer. He used to say that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about creating a world where the innocent can live without fear. She looked up at the detective, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Those girls don't have anyone standing up for them, I do. I have you, Officer Ray Carter, the prosecutor. They have no one." Sullivan's expression softened. In his 24 years of law enforcement, he'd seen too many witnesses cave under pressure. But something told him Eliza Morgan wouldn't be one of them. What neither of them knew was that Walter Jefferson had already decided she couldn't be allowed to testify. "We need to move you," Detective Sullivan said, sweeping glass from her coffee table. Dawn was breaking outside, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold that seemed obscenely beautiful given the circumstances. "Both of you. Today." Eliza watched as Lily stuffed clothes into a backpack, her daughter's movements mechanical, face blank with shock. This wasn't the first time they'd discussed witness protection, but the brick through the window had transformed it from an abstract concept to their imminent reality. "For how long?" Lily asked, her voice small. Sullivan and Eliza exchanged a glance. They both knew the answer, possibly forever. If Jefferson was convicted, his network would still exist. If he walked free, he would never stop hunting the woman who tried to bring him down. "Pack anything irreplaceable," Sullivan said gently to Lily. "Photos, keepsakes." Eliza followed her daughter to her room, watching as she carefully wrapped a framed photo of the three of them, Eliza, Michael, and a 7-year-old Lily, in a sweater before placing it in her bag. "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered, the weight of her choices crushing down on her. Lily looked up, her eyes so like her father's, suddenly fierce. "Don't be. Dad would be proud of you. I am too." Something broke and mended simultaneously in Eliza's chest. Her daughter, forced to grow up too quickly in the shadow of her father's death, now faced another upheaval because of her mother's choices. Yet here she was, offering strength instead of blame. Officer Carter arrived to escort them to the safe house, a stern-looking officer with watchful eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He'd been Lily's assigned protection since the threats began. "Cars. Ready," he announced, scanning the street outside with professional paranoia. They were halfway to the door when Eliza stopped. "My medical bag. I need to get it from the closet." Sullivan frowned. "Eliza, we can get you new." "It was Michael's before it was mine. I'm not leaving it." Her tone left no room for argument. While Sullivan and Officer Carter waited impatiently, Eliza retrieved the battered leather bag from the hall closet. As she turned to go, her eyes caught on the family portrait hanging in the entryway, the three of them at the beach, laughing, unaware of how little time they had left together. In a split-second decision, she took it off the wall and tucked it under her arm. They made it to the car without incident, but as they pulled away from the curb, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. A black SUV was parked 3 houses down, not unusual in their suburban neighborhood, but something about it made her skin prickle. "Sullivan," she said quietly, nodding toward the vehicle. The detective followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "Carter, take a different route. Now." Officer Carter made a sharp right at the next intersection instead of the planned left. In the rearview mirror, Eliza saw the SUV pull out from its parking spot. "They're following us," Lily said, her voice tight with fear. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The SUV accelerated, closing the distance between the vehicles. Sullivan drew his weapon. Officer Carter stepped on the gas, the engine of their unmarked police car roaring in protest. "Get down!" Sullivan shouted as the SUV rammed them from behind, sending them lurching forward. Eliza pulled Lily to the floor of the back seat, covering her daughter's body with her own. The next impact came from the side, metal screaming against metal as the SUV tried to force them off the road. Officer Carter fought the steering wheel, his face a mask of concentration. Sullivan rolled down, his window preparing to return fire if necessary. "Take the next right," he ordered Carter. "The construction site, we can lose them in there." The tires squealed as Carter made the turn, narrowly missing a delivery truck. The SUV wasn't so lucky. It clipped the truck's bumper, spinning sideways before regaining control. Those few seconds gave them the advantage they needed. Carter navigated through the half-built development, a maze of construction equipment and partially framed houses. When they finally emerged on the other side, the SUV was nowhere in sight. No one spoke as they continued to the safe house, the gravity of what had just happened settling over them. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. Jefferson was willing to kill to keep Eliza silent. The safe house was a modest cabin on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense woods that provided natural cover. Robert Jefferson, a commanding officer, in the police department, and Walter's estranged son, met them at the door, his hand resting on his holstered weapon until he confirmed their identities. "You'll be safe here," Sullivan assured them as they settled in. "No one knows about this place except the 4 of us." But Eliza had been a nurse long enough to recognize when someone wasn't telling the whole truth. "What aren't you saying, Jake?" Sullivan sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "The prosecutor wants to move up your testimony. Tomorrow, not 3 days from now." "Tomorrow?" The word felt like a stone in her mouth. Sullivan nodded grimly. "After what happened today, we can't risk waiting. Jefferson must be getting desperate if he's willing to attack a police vehicle in broad daylight." That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the moonlight filter through the trees, turning the forest into a silver landscape of shadows and light. In the other room, Lily slept fitfully, occasional murmurs betraying her troubled dreams. Eliza's thoughts turned to the girls she'd seen that night. How many more had there been before them? How many after? Each with families, dreams, lives that had been stolen. And Walter Jefferson, who saw them not as human beings, but as commodities. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Photo appeared on her screen, a crystal-clear image of Lily asleep in the very room of the safe house where she now lay. The message below it read, "Even here we can reach her. Walk away tomorrow or bury her next week." Eliza's blood turned to ice. She scrambled to Lily's room, finding her daughter exactly as shown in the photo, which meant it had been taken. Minutes ago, someone was watching them. Someone was inside the safe house. She grabbed Lily, shaking her awake. "We have to go, now." "Mom!" Lily blinked in confusion. "Don't make a sound," Eliza whispered, pressing a finger to her lips. She grabbed their bags, still packed, and crept to the bedroom door, listening for any sound that might betray an intruder's presence. The cabin was silent, except for the soft ticking of a clock in the living room, Robert Jefferson should have been on guard, but there was no sign of him. That absence spoke volumes. Hand in hand, mother and daughter slipped down the hallway toward the back door. Eliza's heart hammered so loudly, she was certain it would give them away. As they passed the living room, she glanced inside and froze. Robert Jefferson lay on the floor, a pool of blood spreading beneath his head. His service weapon was missing from its holster. Lily's sharp intake of breath was the only indication she'd seen the same thing. Eliza squeezed her daughter's hand, willing her to keep moving. The back door was just a few feet away now. They had almost reached it when a floorboard creaked behind them. "Mrs. Morgan," a smooth voice called, stopping her in her tracks. "I believe we need to have a conversation about tomorrow." Eliza turned. Slowly, a man in an expensive suit stood in the hallway, holding Robert's gun with practiced ease. She recognized him immediately. Not Walter Jefferson himself, but his right-hand man, Marcus Webb, the real enforcer behind Jefferson's respectable facade. "Lily," Eliza said, her voice remarkably calm, "run." She shoved her daughter toward the door as Webb raised the gun. Lily hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for Webb to adjust his aim. In that moment, Eliza made the only choice she could. She lunged at Webb as the gun went off, the bullet grazing her shoulder instead of hitting her daughter. Pain exploded through her arm, but adrenaline kept her moving. She collided with Webb, sending them both crashing into the wall. "Run!" she screamed at Lily, who finally obeyed, disappearing through the back door into the darkness of the forest. Webb recovered quickly, striking Eliza across the face with the gun. She tasted blood as she fell to the floor, but satisfaction surged. Through her, Lily was safe. That was all that mattered. "Your daughter can't hide forever," Webb said, standing over her. "And neither can you. But Mr. Jefferson is a reasonable man. All you have to do is recant your statement. Say you were mistaken about what you saw." Eliza's laugh was bitter. "Reasonable? He traffics young girls. He just tried to kill my daughter." Webb shrugged, unmoved. "Business is business, nothing personal. It became personal the moment you threatened my child." Despite the pain and fear, Eliza's voice was steady. "I'm testifying tomorrow. Jefferson is going to prison." Webb sighed, as if disappointed by her lack of cooperation. "Then I'm afraid this conversation is over." He raised the gun, aiming at her head. The shot that rang out wasn't from Webb's weapon. He staggered forward, a look of surprise crossing his face before he collapsed beside her, revealing Detective Sullivan standing in the front doorway, his gun still raised. "Lily called me," Sullivan explained, rushing to Eliza's side. "Said you were hurt." He glanced at Webb's motionless form. "Looks like I got here just in time." Eliza closed her eyes in relief, the adrenaline draining away and leaving only pain and exhaustion in its wake. "Robert?" Sullivan's expression was grim. "Paramedics are on their way, but it doesn't look good." "Webb said someone inside tipped them off about the safe house," Eliza murmured, the room beginning to spin around her. "We can't trust anyone." Sullivan nodded, his face hardening. "I know, that's why from now until you testify, you don't leave my sight." As sirens wailed in the distance, Eliza thought of the photo on her phone, proof that Jefferson's reach extended further than they'd imagined. Tomorrow she would face him in court, knowing that even if she won, the fight wouldn't be over. But for the first time since that night in the alley, she allowed herself to feel something like hope. Jefferson wasn't invincible. His network could be broken, and she would be the first crack in his carefully constructed empire. The courthouse steps loomed before Eliza like a mountain to be climbed. Cameras flashed as she walked toward the fall. Entrance, Sullivan and Officer Carter flanking her like sentinels. Her arm was bandaged beneath her blazer, a dull, throbbing reminder of last night's confrontation. Lily was safe. Sullivan had arranged for her to stay with his sister 2 states, away until the trial concluded. But her absence left a physical ache in Eliza's chest, as if a part of her had been torn away. The crowd outside the courthouse was divided. On one side, protesters holding signs demanding justice for trafficking victims. On the other, supporters of Jefferson who couldn't believe their town's benefactor could be guilty of such crimes. As she approached the doors, Eliza's eyes locked with a woman standing apart from both groups. She was perhaps 50, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much sorrow. In her hands she held a photograph of a young girl. Without breaking stride, Eliza moved toward her. "My daughter," the woman said simply, holding out the photo. "Jessica. She disappeared 3 years ago, last seen at one of Jefferson's clubs." Eliza took the photo, studying the smiling teenager with a lump in her throat. "I'll make sure they hear her name today," she promised, carefully tucking the picture into her pocket. Inside the courthouse, the prosecutor was waiting, Diane Chen, a formidable woman with a reputation for being relentless in human trafficking cases. "Are you ready?" Chen asked without preamble. Eliza nodded, though ready felt like an inadequate word for what lay ahead. "I want to request something." Chen raised an eyebrow, waiting. "When I testify, I want to address him directly. I want Walter Jefferson to look me in the eyes." A ghost of a smile crossed Chen's face. "That can be arranged." The courtroom fell silent as Eliza took the stand. From her elevated position, she could see every face in the gallery. Journalists scribbling notes, curious citizens, and in the back, a row of women whose tense postures and haunted eyes marked them as survivors. And there at the defense table sat Walter Jefferson, impeccably dressed, his silver hair perfectly styled, looking more like a distinguished statesman than a predator. Beside him, his attorney, a shark in an expensive suit, whispered something that made Jefferson smile. That smile faltered when Eliza's eyes met his. Recognition passed between them, the same charged moment they'd shared in the alley 6 months ago. The prosecutor's questioning was methodical, establishing the timeline of what Eliza had witnessed. With each answer, she felt stronger, her voice growing more confident as she recounted the unconscious girls, the unmarked van, Jefferson's direct involvement. "Mrs. Morgan," Chen said finally, "can you identify the man you saw that night?" Eliza pointed directly at Jefferson. "Yes, Walter Jefferson." The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal, questioning her eyesight in the dimly lit alley, her mental state as an overworked single mother, insinuating she was seeking attention or financial gain. Throughout it all, Eliza remained composed, answering honestly, refusing to be provoked. When the attorney suggested she had fabricated the entire story out of resentment toward Jefferson's wealth, she allowed herself a small smile. "I'm a nurse," she said simply. "I see the worst of humanity every day and the best. I've held the hands of the dying and helped bring new life into the world. I have no interest in fame or fortune, Mr. Dawson. I'm here because staying silent wasn't an option I could live with." The attorney paused, momentarily thrown off balance. "No further questions," he muttered. As Eliza prepared to step down, she caught Chen's subtle nod, permission to make her requested address to the defendant. "Mr. Jefferson," she said, turning toward him. The courtroom, which had been filled with rustling papers and whispered comments, went completely still. "Last night your associate tried to kill me and my 13-year-old daughter." She held up her bandaged arm as evidence. "He told me it was just business. I wonder if that's what you tell yourself about the girls you traffic, that it's just business." Jefferson's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "I want you to know something," Eliza continued, her voice steady. "Their names matter. Jessica matters." She pulled the photo from her pocket. "Every life you've destroyed matters, and I promise you, no matter what happens in this courtroom today, the world will know what you've done." The judge called for order as murmurs swept through the gallery, but Eliza had said what she needed to say. As she returned to her seat beside Detective Sullivan, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Whatever came next, she had spoken her truth. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning with their verdict. On the counts of human trafficking, kidnapping, and conspiracy, we find the defendant, Walter Jefferson, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Jefferson showed no emotion as he was led away in handcuffs, but the look he gave Eliza promised that this wasn't over. Outside, as reporters clamored for statements, Sullivan steered Eliza toward a waiting car. "We got him," he said quietly. "But his network is still out there." Eliza nodded, understanding the implication. She and Lily wouldn't be truly safe until Jefferson's entire operation was dismantled. There would be more testimonies, more trials, possibly years before they could fully emerge from hiding. As they drove away from the courthouse, Eliza's phone rang, Lily calling from her secure location. "Mom, I saw the news. You did it." Eliza closed her eyes, allowing tears to fall for the first time that day. "We did it, sweetheart. Together." 3 months later, Eliza stood at the kitchen counter of a small apartment in Seattle, their third temporary home since the trial. The Witness Protection Program had given them new names, new backgrounds, a chance to start over. Lily was adjusting well to her new school, showing a resilience that made Eliza's heart swell with pride. A stack of letters sat on the counter, all from families of trafficking victims who had come forward after Jefferson's conviction. Some thanking her, others sharing stories, all connected by a thread of suffering and hope. The last envelope contained only a newspaper clipping, an article announcing that 3 more of Jefferson's associates had been arrested. Scrawled in Sullivan's distinctive handwriting were the words, "The dominoes are falling, stay safe." Eliza smiled, tucking the clipping into a journal where she kept all such updates. It was slow progress, but it was progress nonetheless. Outside, the sun was setting over their new city, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. From the living room came the sound of Lily laughing at something on TV, the carefree laugh of a teenager who was beginning to feel secure again. Eliza joined her daughter on the couch, slipping an arm around her shoulders. On the wall hung the family portrait they'd taken from their old house, a reminder of where they'd come from, of Michael's legacy that lived on in their choices. "Do you think we'll ever go back?" Lily asked, leaning into her mother's embrace. Eliza considered the question. Back to their old lives? No, that door had closed. But back to a place where they could use their real names, where they didn't need to look over their shoulders. "Someday," she answered truthfully, "when it's safe." Lily nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer. "I'm glad you testified," she said after a pause. "Dad would have done the same thing." Eliza pressed a kiss to the top of her daughter's head. The Gicha. Path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But in this moment, with her daughter safe beside her, and the knowledge that her actions had helped bring a measure of justice to the world, she felt something like peace. The weight of silence had been crushing, but the weight of speaking truth, that was a burden she could bear.